Hi, Cassie Garcia here with Sew and Grow Together, and I have a question for you. What do you do if you have more apples than you know what to do with? Or if you have apples that maybe aren't in the best shape? Any ideas? Here's a few we came up with.
Hey, and welcome. We are three families who come together to help each other grow in our faith, family, homesteading, and whatever else life throws our way. Join us on this journey as we sow and grow together.
Okay, so the situation was we do not actually have any apple trees currently growing apples. We're working on growing more fruit trees, but we don't have anything producing much right now. But my dad's neighbor had apple trees and a pear tree, and they've been trying to make pies and do all these things and just could not keep up with all the apples. So he was nice enough to let my dad come out and just pick a few buckets of apples, and he brought them out here. Then we were stuck with this, okay, what do we do with all these apples? These particular apples were not very sweet, and they were not very sour, not very tart. They were a little bit bland. They were kind of flavorless. So we could have used some to make pie. We can can pie filling. That was one of the things we looked at. So we were looking at some ideas. What if you have more apples than you know what to do with? What if you have scraps of the pieces of the apples that you aren't using for other things? The skin, the stems, the core, all of those pieces. Or what if you have some apples with just some squishy parts or bumps and bruises? What are some ideas for things you could do to utilize all of those pieces and minimize waste? Here were a couple things we came up with. Just to make sure that we did not waste anything, because life gets busy and you've got a couple buckets of apples sitting around, and first thing you know there's gnats and things are starting to go bad, and we decided we'd stop everything and spend the evening chopping apples. And we threw most of those in bags in the freezer, so I just popped a couple of these out of the freezer. They do brown a little bit, especially as they are thawing. They're already getting a little darker than they were when I first pulled them out of the freezer. But just chopping them and throwing them in a freezer bag in the freezer, that at least ensured they weren't just going bad sitting in the bucket. Now, one thing you can always do with apples, any parts of the apple, is give them to animals. So the chickens, the goats, even the dogs sometimes like apples. The dogs are a little picky. They're not really big fans of apples, but I've seen where some dogs are. What you want to be careful with is the seeds. I have read that the seeds contain a little bit of something that could be poisonous to animals if you chew them up. Most animals are not chewing the individual seeds. They're chomping up the apple, and the seeds just kind of slide right on down, which is the nature of seeds, because then as the animal poops them out, they can grow. So by the nature of seeds, they don't usually get chewed, and that's not usually a problem. So dogs, the chickens love any pieces of the apple. The goats will eat any pieces of the apple. We don't give the goats apples just all the time, but as a little treat, they like that. But let's say you want to use some of these and not just throw them to the animals. We actually want to make something useful. So we tried two other things with these apples that I'm going to share with you today. So the first thing that we made, I'm getting ready to make here today, and that is apple pectin. The second thing I've already started, I'm going to show you a little bit of that process, is apple cider vinegar. Both of these things, you can use scraps. You can take the whole apple, chop it up into chunks that are a little more manageable. You can throw out anything that's maybe bad, rotten, or squishy, but it doesn't have to be the best of your apples. You can use the apple peel, the core, the stems, the seed, whatever you don't use for other things. And that is what we were really looking for. One of the nice things about using apple scraps for pectin is that it does not have to be fresh. So that kind of opens up a world of possibilities here. You could use apples from the store or that you've picked or whatever. And as you use them, maybe if I were to core or peel them for my kids, I could throw those scraps, the parts that they didn't eat, that we didn't use, in a bag and throw it in the freezer, and then add to it every time. And when I have enough, take them all out and use them to make pectin. Makes for a really efficient use of our apples because we don't have to do it all in one giant amount. But maybe this time of year you do have a whole bunch of apples. You can just chop them all up, throw them in the freezer. The ones that you don't want to use but you don't want to go to waste. So what is pectin? Pectin is a natural substance found in a lot of fruit, especially apples. There are other fruit that contain pectin as well. Green apples that are a little underripe. Pectin is a thickening agent, and we maybe wouldn't want to it this particular thickening agent in soups that you don't want to taste fruity. But in jams and jellies, it's perfect because it has a little bit of that sour fruity taste, and it works just right in jellies and jams. We add them when we're making jelly so that it will really gel up and give it that not quite solid but more than liquid consistency that we're looking for. If you have made jelly before, you've probably used a box like this where it's got a powder. You just dump it in, follow the recipe. Usually you add the fruit juice of whatever fruit you're using, a lot of sugar, and pectin. And then maybe some recipes might call for like lemon juice or something like that to give it a little bit more acidity. So we decided to do a little experiment. We have all of these grapes that we've juiced from another friend. We thought we would try to make grape jelly in 2 batches that were as similar as humanly possible. We tried to keep everything the same, except in one of them we used our homemade apple pectin, and the other one we used a original Surgel package from the store. And I can't wait to show you that because it's really interesting. You have to check out that video too. But today we're gonna just make the pectin. So easy. We're gonna put all of the apple chunks, and they've been sitting out for a minute, they're still kind of cold. We'll put them all in the pot, and we're gonna just cover it with water, just enough to kind of cover it, not too much. You are gonna wanna boil this all down, so if you add more water, it's just gonna take longer for it to really boil down to a good consistency. This is not like the packages. We can't exactly measure how much pectin is gonna be in this precisely because there are just so many variables. So it depends on the ripeness of the fruit, the parts of the fruit that might contain more pectin than others. It might be varied based on how much we boil it down. If there's still more water in it, it's going to be more watered down. There's going to be a lower percentage of pectin in the final jar. We're going to get it really heated, and we're going to boil it down low, and then we'll strain our apples.
Once we got the apples boiling, I just brought the heat down to a little below medium and let it simmer. This went on for several hours, and just every little bit we would come and stir and make sure nothing was burning or sticking. And the house smelled like fall. It was wonderful. The whole house smelled like apples, and we just let it go. I don't remember where I got these cotton cloths, but I've used them so much. They are not quite as fine as cheesecloth, but they do a really great job of straining this kind of stuff. So we left it sitting in a colander with a bowl underneath it overnight in the refrigerator within the cloth. And then when we were done, we strained out all the liquid, put it in a jar, which then also went in the refrigerator, and we used it within the next few days to make some grape jelly.
So while I've got my apple pectin boiling down here, let's talk about the next thing that we can do with our apple scraps. Number 3, homemade apple cider vinegar. This is something that I think is really interesting and neat. We use apple cider vinegar for so many things. We put it in the animal's water. It's really great for your own immune system, your digestive system, all of these things. People will take a small shot of apple cider vinegar before a meal. That can help keep their blood sugar a little more balanced throughout the meal, and at the end have less of a blood sugar issue if that's something they deal with. There's just so many things it's great for. We actually use it to catch gnats. We use a little bit of apple cider vinegar and some sugar, a little drop of soap, and add water to it, and it is great at catching fruit flies and gnats. So let's talk about what is vinegar. What is vinegar? How is it made? Vinegar is basically something that's been fermented to the point of being alcohol and then fermented some more until it turns into vinegar. Fermenting is something that I find is really fascinating. It's a preservation method for our food. We can preserve by fermenting foods, and it's one of the only preservation methods that actually increases the nutritional value of our food, which is incredible. So if we take a liquid and ferment it, it becomes alcohol, like wine or anything like that. They have fermented something, whether that's grains like beer, or if it's grapes to make wine, all of those things, it's fermented to make an alcohol. When we go past that, it becomes a vinegar, and it develops this sour smell and taste. If I want to make apple cider vinegar, that is a type of vinegar that you can easily buy at the store. You can find it raw and unfiltered, which would mean that it has part of that mother culture. If you've ever made kombucha, you know that SCOBY at the top, that's like the mother culture. It is that living, growing thing that helps transform the liquid in that container into whatever you're growing. Kombucha, vinegar. I don't know if you've ever made kombucha and you've just let it sit for a long time. It starts smelling more and more vinegary and sour. And so it is also making a kind of vinegar. The apple cider vinegar actually can start with just the natural bacteria and yeast and everything on the fruit naturally. So you'd want to make sure you do not use fruit that's sprayed with insecticide or anything. You want to make sure it is organic. If you buy it at the store, or if you know who you're getting the apples from, ask them if they've sprayed anything. And you would not want to use something that's sprayed, or you'd want to wash it really well if you're using the skin. But even in doing that, you're going to lose some of that good bacteria that actually naturally comes on the apple. Also, when I had frozen apples and I pulled them out of the freezer, that would not be a good thing to use as your only source of making apple cider vinegar, because you have killed some of those beneficial microorganisms when you froze it. You can use it for the bulk of the apple cider vinegar and add some fresh, and that would help give it that good stuff. You can also add some apple cider vinegar as almost like a starter for your apple cider vinegar that you're making, and it would give you some of that culture. Organic, raw, unfiltered. Those are the words you're looking for. This process is one of many that go along with fermentation, in that it takes a long time, but not a lot of work that whole time. There's some initial setup, and then you have a lot of waiting time, and then switching things over and more waiting, and then bottling up. And then you just get to use it. Now you can find a lot more specific and scientific ways to make vinegar and apple cider vinegar, and different parts of the process that some people are very particular about. And I am all for that. I find it fascinating. Honestly, what we look for a lot of times is, how can I make something with things that I already have without going out and buying new things, without, without having a whole lot of fancy equipment? What can I do with what I've already got? The process to get started was really simple. So we took 3 half-gallon jars. We filled them about halfway full with apple chunks. We did use the apples that we had not frozen. So as we were chopping up the apples, we froze some of them, and the rest we used for apple cider vinegar. So we filled 3 jars, half-gallon jars, about halfway full of apples. Then we put a ½ cup of sugar in each one, and that was organic cane sugar, because again, when you're talking about fermenting, you want to be really careful. You're going to want to avoid things like, really heavily processed things that might have been sprayed or have chemicals in there that might alter the ferment. So we used organic cane sugar. We have well water here, so we don't have to worry about chlorine or anything being in that. You can use some kind of distilled water, something without chlorine, because chlorine kills the bacteria, which we actually want to grow in this. So we've got apples, sugar, and water. in our jars. We added just a little bit of the apple cider vinegar that we had from the store that was raw and unfiltered as a little bit of a starter. Then we covered it with a cotton cloth. Cheesecloth is great, but anything with slightly bigger gaps may let in the fruit flies or the gnats, anything. Bugs are very much attracted to apple cider vinegar and the fermenting process in general, which is why it makes a great gnat trap, which we use around our kitchen. But I don't want gnats in my apple cider vinegar. We lost one of our 3 jars that we were making. There were a couple small holes in the fabric, and by the time I realized it, there were crawly things in there. It was no good. So for the next 2 weeks, I would get out each jar and I took my big wooden spoon and stirred it up to disturb everything. The sugar would tend to settle at the bottom at the beginning and the apples floating on top, and if you do not disturb it, the fermentation process isn't going to happen very well. You might grow mold on the top as well. So we just stirred that every single day, okay, most days, for 2 weeks, and then we removed it from the bottle, strained it, and put it in another jar. At the end of 2 weeks, it was looking a little bit different. Instead of the apples all floating at the bottom, they were coming down a little. It was looking cloudier. So we strained it. We're gonna leave it sitting undisturbed in a cool, dark place. I'm just using the back of a pantry shelf here in the kitchen so I don't forget about it, but it does not get any sunlight. I can smell, it's very much smelling like alcohol right now in this part of the process. My goal is to let it continue that fermentation for a few more weeks. We'll smell it again. You can actually test the acidity. It does get more acidic as you get more of a vinegar content. Basically what I've got right now is apple alcohol, which is not really what I want to use. So we're looking for apple cider vinegar and it's not quite there yet. So I'm gonna put it back on the shelf. So the alcohol is then replaced with acetic acid, which is something that has a lot of really great benefits for a lot of things. It has a very acidic pH, usually between like 2 and 3, so it's pretty acidic. And it definitely has that sour, acidic smell. After a month or so of this last fermentation process, I will be bottling the apple cider vinegar in just probably jars and labeling it, mason jars with the plastic lids, and I will label it and put it on the shelf for use. You can also keep, if you buy a lot of apple cider vinegar, you can keep the containers and just use those in empty containers to put your own apple cider vinegar in. That works as well. I hope this has helped you if you've been looking for some ideas how to use apple scraps. If you have any more ideas, just drop them in the comments. We would love to take a look at it. We don't have any more apples this year, but I'm sure in the coming years we will be looking for more creative ways to use up scraps of apples. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you later. Thanks.